All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for being here with us. I'll briefly introduce this webinar so that we can also give a few extra minutes to the few late people that still want to join us to actually do that. My name is Claudia Bonfio. I am a junior group leader at the Institute for Supramolecular Science and Engineering in Strasbourg, and I am the networks team leader of the European Young Chemists Network, as this is an event, a webinar organized by the European Young Chemists Network. Together with me today, before we actually give the word to the great speaker that we have with us, there's Beatrice Bartolomei, who will introduce our speaker and then will help me chairing this session. Beatrice, if you want to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Claudia, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So I'm Beatrice Bartolomei, and I'm a PhD student in nanotechnology at the University of Trieste in Italy. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jen Heemstra for this event. So Jen studied chemistry at the University of California, where she graduated in 2000. And then she moved to University of Illinois, where she completed her PhD in 2005. After a brief time in industry as medicinal chemist, she moved to Harvard University for postdoctoral research. And then Jen began her independent career in 2010, and she is currently a full professor at Emory University. Her research is focused on the study of self-assembly properties of nucleic acid and proteins for applications in biosensing and bioimaging. And then she is also actively engaged in science communication, and she promotes the spreading of important themes related to academic life. Mentorship will be the focus of today's discussion. So thank you very much, Jen, for being with us, and please, the stage is yours.
Okay, I will stop sharing, and while I stop sharing and let Jen talking about mentoring, I will just say that obviously questions are very welcome. And so please just make use of the Q&A box of Zoom so that we can then answer all of your questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And a special thank you to Claudia and Beatrice for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you on this topic. This is a topic that is extremely near and dear to my heart. And in fact, I think mentorship, more than anything else, has impacted my career. I often get asked, like, how are you so enthusiastic? And the answer to that is multifaceted, but really a lot of it is that I never ever thought I could be where I am. I never should have been able to be where I am. And I have this job that I absolutely love, and I can't believe that I'm here. And I know that I'm here for a lot of reasons, but a lot of that is that I have had phenomenal mentors throughout my career. And so I often tell people something that people often find surprising is when I say, my PhD advisor is actually more important to me as a mentor now than when I was a PhD student. And that often does surprise people, but it's extremely, extremely true. And so I wanted to start with a story. And before I dive in, I'll say we're going to have a lot of participation. And so hopefully that'll be fun. Some of it will be via a program called Poll Everywhere. Some of it will be some time on your own, but it's also, for me as a speaker, really fun to get to see faces. And so if anyone is willing to leave their camera on, I know that some people might not feel comfortable for that. And so definitely don't feel like you have to, but if anyone is willing to leave their camera on, it's kind of fun to be able to talk to other people as I work through the different slides and webinar and tell you these stories. And so I want to start out with a really cheery topic as we dive into mentorship. And it's a story of this cheery topic of the worst day of my life. But it was also the day that I really more than any other day realized the importance of mentors. And so what happened is that, you know, I somehow managed to become a faculty member. I had this job that I had always dreamed of, and I was going along, and in the US system, about 5 years in, there's this thing called a tenure vote. And this is, you know, you either get tenure and then you have a job more or less forever, or you don't, and then you are out of a job. It's like, you know, you need to find a new job and your career as an academic is kind of over. And I thought that things were going really, really well. Everything I'd heard said that things were going well, but then I got a vote that wasn't nearly as enthusiastic as I had expected. And it wasn't clear what was going to happen, but all signs would point to, you know, this is the end of the road. I need to find a new job. And I was absolutely devastated, right? This is, you know, I had dreamed so long of having this career, for so long had thought that I could never have this job. And then I finally had this job and I was working so hard at it. And then I found out that maybe, you know, I was not going to get to have this job anymore. So, this was absolutely devastating. And I'll never forget, it was a really wild kind of 48 hours because I got this news and, you know, shut my door, cried for a minute, called my spouse, went and talked to my group. The way my group approached it, I'll talk about in the next slide, fundamentally changed me as a person, fundamentally changed our group forever. But then the other interesting thing is that this happened the day before my brother was getting married. And so I had just enough time to talk with my group, rush home, suitcases were packed, get in the car, we're heading to the airport. And my mind is just going 90 miles an hour. I'm a doer, right? And so we're driving to the airport. And I'm like, okay, I need to do this. I need to apply for new jobs. I have to do this. I have to do that. And my spouse, who is the source of all wisdom, said, before you do any of that, why don't you talk to your PhD advisor? And I was like, yes, that is the suggestion of an hour and of the hour. And so this was the worst day of my life, but it was the day that I most fully realized the importance of mentors. So, you know, in the car, you know, sending an email to my PhD advisor who wrote back something very supportive and said, let me know when you're willing to talk. And so, you know, we were on planes and then in cars and then at dinners and all sorts of things. And it got late. And we made it to Arizona for my brother's wedding. And I basically slept almost none. At that point, we had something like a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old, and the 2-year-old also slept none because if you have 2-year-olds, you know, when you go anywhere, they don't sleep. And so around 3 or 4 in the morning, you know, 2-year-old is up and running around, and I say, well, I haven't slept all night. I could use some coffee, put him in the stroller and go out for a walk. And it was, you know, something like 5 or 6 a.m., you know, my PhD advisor's time zone. And I shot him a text and said, hey, do you have time to chat? And the text pops up and says, yes, of course, call whenever. And my group has reminded me now, like, oh, so 6 a.m. on a Saturday, we can call. I'm like, yeah, if it's like the worst day of your life, you know, that's fine. And so my PhD advisor shows up via the phone, and we just had a phenomenal conversation where he offered support, exactly what a mentor should do. He offered support. He asked some questions about what I wanted to do. And then he said, okay, in light of that, let's make a game plan. And I'll tell you what, I left that conversation feeling about 1 million times better about the entire situation than I had before. And there was a lot that happened over the next 48 hours and the next, you know, 4 to 8 months. And I ultimately did get tenure. But what I came away from that experience, you know, is the worst day of my life, because I mean, I've had a lot of really bad things happen in my life, but when you feel like a bad thing happens, and it's your fault, and you have now let down, you know, I let down my group, my family. I felt like I had ruined it for all of the people I cared about the most in this world. That's what really made it the worst day of my life. But it also became the most important day of my career. If I went through that, if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't realize that I was strong enough to make it through that. When you start an academic career, this is the thing you're always afraid of, is what if I don't get tenure? And I always thought, like, oh, I don't know how I would even begin to deal with that. And then when it's happening, you really just don't have any choice. It also just made me more empathetic as a person. The way my group approached it, the support that my group showed in that moment, they just said, well, we know we've earned this. And whether it's here or somewhere else, we're going to keep being a lab, and we're going to keep doing our research. And as long as we all stick together, we're all going to get through this, and we're just going to keep doing great things. I will tell you, that was incredibly humbling for me as a leader, and really just inspired me. That I was so inspired by my lab that it changed how we function as a lab, and it changed who I am as a person. And it gave me so much vision and clarity for transforming our academic culture. And I would not be here, I would not be me on Twitter or blogging or in CNE News or at these different universities if I had not gone through that experience. And all of that happened because I had great mentors who stuck with me and helped me make it through that. Great mentors, great colleagues in my lab, great collaborators. And so that's a little bit of, it's a very dramatic story, but that's my story about why mentorship is so important. And so now it's your turn to tell me what you think about mentorship. And so this information will be on the next slide. If you're in the US, you can text Jen Heemstra 22333. I'm not sure if that works in Europe, but no matter where you are in the world, you can go to pollev.com and then enter /Jen Heemstra 693. And then that will allow you to participate when we get to the next slide. And this will all be on the next slide, but it's more fun if I give you a second to log in now. All right, here we go. So in one word, importantly, one word, or if you want multiple words, no spaces, with no spaces, what is the thing that comes to mind when you think about mentoring? Oh, these are so good. Yes, support, definitely. Guidance, connections, yeah, role models, direction. Safety, I love that. That is beautiful. Yeah, being a model. Caring, advising, personalized. So important. I'm not going to talk about how to be a great mentor. I'll talk about it very, very briefly at the end, but that is so important and is a skill that is a lifetime to learn. Yeah, support, guidance. It's mutual. That is such a good one too, that often the people who you mentor can be mentors to you. Cheering, your future perspectives. Yes, helping you see a perspective that you might not have seen. I could say a lot of things about what I learned about mentoring through that story I just told you that I don't have time to talk about, but if we get to it in the Q&A. All right, last few seconds. These are such good answers. See, you're already experts when it comes to mentoring. All right, lots of great thoughts. And so there's a lot of, mentoring is a multifaceted thing. And there's lots of different types of mentors you need. And there's lots of different types of mentoring that you need. And so what are those and why do you need those, right? I think you already get this, that mentors can help you in so many ways. I think I saw up there advice and perspectives, guidance. They can provide really practical advice as you make a plan or deal with a challenge. Often, great mentors will ask you great questions and they will help you think through your options. They won't just come in, a really great mentor won't just come in and say, oh, you should do this. They'll ask you questions so that you can understand what you need to do. Often, they'll be able to provide a perspective. I know I saw perspective on that last slide that you haven't seen. They might have access to information or experiences where they can say, oh, I know it feels this way to you, but let me tell you what might really be going on here. And, or, hey, let me tell you what this option might look like, even though you can't see it. And that can be really important. They can connect you with resources. They can provide that support. They can say, hey, I will reach out and connect you with these people who can help you further, and connect you with more mentors and champions. And so really, it's not about having a mentor. It's really, I'll get to this at the end. It's about having a whole network of mentors. And something so important is that network should just continue to grow throughout your career, because the further you go in your career, if you ask me like, well, why do you say your PhD advisor is so important? I mean, certainly on that day when I didn't know if I was getting tenure, my PhD advisor was incredibly important. But the further you go in your career, the more complex are the challenges you face. And the less information you have, you know, the less obvious is the rule book for how to navigate those situations. And so those mentors, and the stakes just keep getting higher. And so those mentors are so critical. All right. Now that I've built up to be a big thing, I will come back and say, but it doesn't have to be a big commitment. You know, you have often these mentors who are really have a life-changing impact on your career. But at the same time, it doesn't have to start out that way. That mentoring can be a one-time event, or it can be a lifelong relationship. And often it doesn't start with a conversation that says, you know, will you be my mentor? Often it just starts with a conversation where you're talking with someone and then they happen to offer you advice and then you talk some more. And then over time, you know, they become a mentor. And so I'll say, as you look to expand your mentorship network, a good way to do this is to just keep building. We're always building relationships. Anytime you're at a conference and you talk to someone, anytime you're on social media and you engage with someone, you pass them in the hallway, someone in your department, and you just say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about a situation I'm facing, or let's just talk generally about your career. You're starting to build that relationship. And it's okay to realize that someone might be a great mentor, but they're not the right mentor for you. And that's okay too. If you start having someone as a mentor and then you realize this just isn't really helpful, it's not something you have to continue. But there are times when, you know, you have to choose these mentors who are going to have a huge, huge impact on your life. One of the most obvious ones is when you're choosing a PhD or a postdoc advisor. And I always say, this is one of the more important choices you're going to make in your career, because some mentors will have this huge, huge impact on both your success and also your happiness as you navigate through your career. And so, you know, if you are in a position where you're about to go to grad school or you're in grad school and you're thinking about choosing a postdoc advisor, it's easy to think that the research is going to be the number one thing guiding that decision, right? You're going to go to grad school or go in your postdoc, and most of what you do will be research. However, the surprising thing is that it's actually the mentoring style of that advisor and the culture in that lab that's going to have much more impact on your happiness and your ultimate success than any specific research project, right? Because research projects come and go. If you join a lab with a mentor you don't get along with, or a lab that has a culture that's not working for you, but a really cool project, you know, what happens a year or two in when you realize, oh, that project isn't working so well, and now you have to change projects, and the other one is a little bit less exciting. And now there's not much to be excited about in that situation. Whereas if you're in a place with a supportive mentor and supportive colleagues, no matter what you work on, it's going to be a good experience. Obviously, you know, for me, I'm a chemical biologist. I shouldn't go join a condensed matter physics lab. That would be a bad idea. But within a fairly large swath of science, you know, really focus on, you know, the research is important, but I would say that the people are even more important. And so how do you go about making these decisions? You know, if you're about to head off for a PhD or choosing a postdoc, you haven't had the opportunity to interact with these people a great deal, but that doesn't mean that you can't still make an informed decision, right? And so the first step in this is to think about what you're looking for. You know, there are some mentoring styles that aren't good or bad, they're just different. And really the key is to think about your preferences at the point in your career where you are, and then to line those up with the different choices that you have. So these might be things like lab size. Do you want to be in a lab with 5 people where everyone talks to each other every day? Or do you want to be in a lab of 50 people where you might not even know some of your colleagues' names, but there's all of these people doing different things that you can connect with? You know, do you want a PhD or postdoc advisor who's going to swing through the lab every day and say, how are the experiments going? You know, that was great for me as an undergrad, but by the time I hit my PhD, I knew that if I had that, I would be like, just annoyed beyond compare, right? And so I wanted to find, when I heard that my PhD advisor like never came in lab, I was like, yes, that is a good, like that, I want to go find him when I want to talk to him. But if someone's coming up to me at 5 o'clock every day saying, how are things going? I'm gonna be like, no, I got this. Like, let me be independent, right? How much do you want to guide your project? Do you want to be the one driving the ideas, or do you want someone who's going to partner more closely with you on that, right? So wherever you're at, if you're thinking about choosing an advisor, think about your preferences. Think about, what am I looking for right now at this stage in my career? And what do these different labs have to offer? And try to match those up. So there are some things that are neither inherently good or bad. There are also some things that are actually good or bad. And so in this case, the goal is to look for the bad things, avoid those, look for the good things and find those. And those are things like, having a culture of inclusion and respect. Who doesn't want to go to work at a place where they feel like they belong and they feel like they're treated with dignity and respect? That is just universal. Flexibility on work hours, right? Whatever you're doing, if it spans multiple years, there's a really good chance that life is going to happen, that something is going to come up, a family emergency, or even just having to go to the dentist and needing to do that during work hours. And if you have that flexibility and reasonable workload, that's something that's beneficial. And then finally, just valuing your professional development, looking for people who want to support you in whatever career path you want to pursue, and who are going to make sure that you're equipped with what you need in order to be successful in doing that. And so this is a little bit harder to get at, but you can certainly look for signs of healthy or unhealthy environments and avoid unhealthy environments at all costs. I will say, if you find yourself saying it's only 5 years, or how bad can it be? It's like, yes, 5 years is a very, very long time, and it can be very, very bad. And so there is, at all costs, avoid an unhealthy environment, because nothing is worth sacrificing your health. And, if you you can analyze it and make all of these metrics, but at the end of the day, a good test I like to use when I'm talking with someone who's thinking, do I join this lab or do I join that lab? I say, you're going to think about this in terms of like the best day of your career, right? Like, you're going to think about, where do I want to be when all of my experiments are going right, and my manuscript just got accepted, and my fellowship got funded, and life is grand, and I'm graduating in 3 months. But really what you want to think about, as unfun as it is, you want to think about the worst day of your life, when nothing is going right in lab, you just had your fellowship rejected, and then you get a phone call that you have a personal emergency to deal with. Whose office do you want to walk into on that day? For me, it was on the day when you realize your career might be over. Who is the person that you want to know you can email or call them, and they're going to pick up and they're going to give you advice? And every time, choose that person, because that is a decision that is going to pay dividends over many, many years. And so how do you figure all of this out, right? This is the part where the fact that we're researchers is greatly to our benefit. We are researchers and we have research skills, and we can aim those research skills, much like we do at chemistry experiments, we can aim those research skills at learning about different mentoring environments. And so, something I suggest is reach out to current and former group members, and importantly, ask them really specific questions. Instead of saying, oh, are they a good mentor? Or is it a, healthy lab environment? Ask questions like, I think I have these, how do they respond when you tell them about a failed project or a failed experiment? Are they supportive, or do they get angry? What professional development activities do they do? Do they do professional development activities to help you grow and be ready for your career? What happened when you had a personal emergency? Can you go and, go to a doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. without them being upset? Tell me about a time that, you needed flexibility in work hours, and what are the policies for that? And these are the things, when you start asking these really specific questions, these are the things that will really start to unearth, what are the environments that you want to be in and which ones are not. All right, so that's when it comes to choosing those really important kind of life-changing mentors like your PhD advisor, but it goes far beyond that. That sometimes, the need for a mentor is clear, things like your thesis advisor, but your network should be much, much bigger. And so really encourage you, think about all of the skills you want to build, think about all the career paths you might explore, all the decisions that you need to make. And for all of those, there are people who can help you with those. And no one person is going to have all the answers. So you really need a network of mentors. And actually going back to the story I started with, one of, obviously I learned the importance of mentors. I already had a pretty good handle on that, but I appreciated it more than I ever had. One of the things that I learned in that experience, really for the first time, was the importance of having multiple mentors for the same thing. That over the course of a couple of days, I ended up talking to about 10 different mentors, which was probably too many. I should have only talked to 4 or 5 people, but lots of people reached out and wanted to offer advice. And I was so happy and grateful for that advice that they offered. But I talked to 10 different people, all of whom were phenomenal mentors for me, all of whom cared deeply about me, had tons of experience in academia, and in general, give really good advice. And I actually got about 10 very different pieces of advice about what I should do next. Excuse me. And so that was a moment when I realized, all of these people are great mentors. It isn't that some care about me and some don't, or some are giving good advice and some are giving bad advice, but rather that they all have different perspectives on this situation. They all have different amounts of knowledge about the situation. They all have different personal experiences. They all work in different contexts. And so they're going to see this situation from different angles. And in doing that, they were able to help me see the situation from different angles. And that really drove home the importance of, if you have a really big decision or a really big situation, going and getting advice from 3 or 4 people can be incredibly helpful, because then if you get all these different perspectives, you can say, oh, okay, I think maybe this is a little bit more accurate to the situation, or this is a little bit more to my preferences, and chart a course. But it's so important to have this very diverse network of mentors, both within a single situation and across all of the different situations that you're going to encounter. All right, so how do you build this network of mentors? Something that many people don't know about me: I seem like an extrovert. I am actually an introvert. And one of my great fears is social interactions, right? Having conversation with people I've never met. I end up really enjoying it when I get the chance to do this. But when, the conference gets out and it's time for the social hour, there is definitely, some distinct fear that I feel about, what if I'm in a conversation and then no one has anything to say, and what's going to happen? It's going to be really awkward. And that anxiety is there. But this is where having some processes, just knowing okay, this is what I can always do, helps me a lot. Now, everyone who ever meets me at conferences can be like, oh, Jen is doing that, but that's okay. But if you're not sure how to interact with someone, if you're like me and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in this interaction, what if it gets really awkward? The template to avoid that awkwardness is questions. Ask questions. Most people love to talk about their thoughts and ideas or life experiences. And so if you have the chance to interact with a mentor, whether it's someone you just end up talking to, during the social hour after a conference, or someone that you've called up and said, hey, I would love to get mentoring, think about questions in advance that you can ask them. Things like, what do you think I should be focusing on right now? If you're talking with someone who's in a career path you aspire to, you might say, what advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue this career path? What advice would you give to yourself at my career stage? Or one of my favorite questions, I started asking this about 5-6 years ago, is what's the question that I don't even know that I need to be asking? What is the thing that I'm not thinking about, but I should be thinking about? And let's talk about that. All right, so another share. So it's your turn. And as these go through, they'll kind of come and go, but enter in what's a question you can ask a mentor. And if you see something you really like, there will be kind of a participatory activity coming up really soon. And so kind of jot down any good ideas that you see. what are questions that you could ask a mentor? This could be an advisor. This could be someone outside of science who's mentoring you in a different area of life. It could be someone in a career path that you hope to pursue. If you met up with them, you were on a Zoom call with them, or you ran into them, yeah, what do you think my next step should be? What would you ask? Yeah, industry or academia. Oh, we can have a whole conversation about that. Oh, yeah, work and family balance. Yeah, anything you need. What else can you ask? Oh, that is such a good one. Yeah, asking people to reflect on what they see from, say, your research. Oh, so good. What gives you the energy to do science and deal with the uncertainties? I love that. Like, how do you do this? Finding your own research. When you're lost, it's okay. I love this too. It's totally okay to just say, I just don't even know what to ask right now. I'm just really struggling. What should I be thinking about? What should I do? Who else should I talk to? These are amazing questions. Yeah, getting out of a difficult situation. How do you build communities of diverse student at PWI? That is a really big one. What's your view? Oh, do you think I made the right decision? I love this. So often we think about decisions when they're coming up, but it's so important to review your decisions after the fact. Anytime I go through a really challenging situation, I always look back and say, all right, what did I handle well? What could I have done better? What did I learn from this? And what would I do differently next time? And engaging mentors in that can be really, really helpful, because then you can at least learn from a difficult situation and do better next time. How to improve? Yeah, can I focus on my family for a while? Oh, these are so good. How do you get ideas? Why did you choose? Where do you see me in 5 years? Oh, these are amazing questions. All right, I'll give this a few more seconds because there's so much good stuff here. And we're basically crowdsourcing the to-do activity that we're going to have in a second. Find out what's important, prioritize that. How can I prepare myself for an interview? Very good. All right. Cool. So now it's your turn. I just think, every good kind of workshop or seminar, if you're going to spend an hour here, and I so appreciate that you would take the time to join us for this, I want you to have something that you can take away from this that will, in a very practical way, advance your career and benefit you. And so we're going to take 5 minutes and then I'll wrap up right after that. And think about an area where you would benefit from mentoring. There were tons on that last slide, whether it's a job application, making a career decision, navigating a tricky situation, whatever it is, think about something that's coming up where you would benefit from mentoring. Think about 3 people, either bonus points if it's specific people, or it could be somebody who works in industry. It could be a type of person that you want to reach out to, and then write down 3 questions that you would ask each of them. It could be the same 3 for each person, and then decide when you'll do this by and write it on your to-do list so that there's some accountability and you'll do this. So I'll stop talking. I'll give you 5 minutes and then we'll wrap up and go to the Q&A. We're about halfway through the time. So if you haven't yet, move on to the 3 questions you plan to ask and make sure that you get those. About 1 minute left. So if you haven't yet, start putting this on your calendar or your to-do list. Have a plan and some deadlines. All right, so if you didn't get to finish that, feel free to take a screenshot of this and finish that up later today with the idea that no matter what, if you do this, you will expand your mentor network. And reaching out to those people, if it's someone you know well, maybe you just, run into them in the hallway, but no matter what, you can reach out by email and say, something like, hey, I aspire to a career path that you're on. I would love to chat with you. Would you be willing to talk with me? And maybe not everyone will respond or will have the capacity at that point to say yes. But if you keep asking, you can definitely find 3 people who will chat with you. And hopefully you can learn a lot from doing that. I know I still do this. I actually did a similar activity with my group and then I realized, oh my goodness, I need to do this too. And then I did, and it was really a lot of fun. All right, so I'll just wrap up by saying, last thought on mentoring is to pass it on. That often we think that we start out early in our career, that we are mentees and we have mentors, and that at some point we move into being mentors who mentor others and we no longer need mentors. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's really just one big continuum. And no matter where you are on your career path, whether you're in college, in grad school, postdoc, faculty member, no matter where you are, there are certainly people who are ahead of you on the career path who you can, have as mentors and gain advice from. There are peers you can have as mentors and gain advice from. And no matter where you are, there are people who are a few steps behind you who are looking up to you and who you can be a mentor to. And that really we improve academic culture when we all, seek out great mentors and then pass that on to others, because we have all benefited from mentors who took time to help us. And there are always people who are looking for mentors and who might be looking up to you. And, I often say with mentoring, you can't, sometimes you can kind of pay it back, though it shouldn't have to be transactional. People aren't doing, mentoring you because they expect to get something back from you, but you can always pay it forward. Some of the maybe most fulfilling things I've gotten to do is when there's someone who has mentored me in a certain way, and then I've had the opportunity to help someone else in that same way. And so we can all pay it forward by being a fantastic mentor to others. Or if we've not had great mentors, we can pay it forward by being much better to others so that they don't have to deal with the things we have. And, you know, everything that each of us does as a mentor can impact generations of scientists, because again, we learn how to be mentors from what we've experienced. And so as we push for more positive mentoring practices, we not only directly impact the people we're working with, but we impact the people who they will eventually mentor as well. And that creates a really positive legacy. And so with that, I will just finish up and say a huge thank you, both for the opportunity to be here, and also I have to say a huge thank you to the members of my research group. I didn't talk about their work today. They all do absolutely fascinating research, but they are also just such an incredible group of people to work with. They are so creative and driven and talented and fun, and they create this inclusive culture in our lab that makes it a wonderful place to come to work each day. And so I'm just so fortunate to get to have each of them as colleagues. And with that, I will thank everyone for taking the time to join, and I look forward to our Q&A time.
The only thing I don't like about webinars is that you don't hear people clapping. But I'm sure that at this point there will be a huge applause for this presentation. It was really great. Thank you, Jen. So I will just remind everyone that if you have questions, so please type them in the Q&A so that we can answer them live. And while we give the time to everyone to formulate their questions, I have, I was actually, it was very curious to hear that you are an introvert. I am meeting so many people that say that they are introverts, and I'm like, where are the extroverts at this point? It feels like we are all on that side, so it's pretty cool to find out. I have a question, a curiosity about how did this start? So is there a point in which you realize, oh, now I'm a mentor for someone else? Because you talked a lot about being the mentee and having amazing mentors, which is something that we wish to everyone that is here today, and also those that are not here today. But when do you start to be on the other side? Was there a moment in which you realized, oh, I'm a mentor?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I probably started to realize that as a graduate student. That was the first time that I ever had someone kind of refer to me as a mentor. But now looking back, you realize, oh, no, it goes all the way back to, high school or even earlier. I would say it was likely when I was a more senior graduate student and there were new students who were joining the lab. And I think my PhD advisor said, hey, one of the most impactful things you can do is to pass on your knowledge before you graduate to these new people who are joining the lab, because I had benefited, and I realized, I benefited from when I was joining and didn't know what to do, the senior people who took me aside and said, hey, we're going to run this reaction together. We're going to sit down and talk about your first manuscript, all of those things. And I think that was the first time I had an official role. I had the role, but I didn't have the skills for it. And I also distinctly remember that of thinking, okay, this is now part of something that I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know how to do it well. And it's really learning how to be a great mentor is just a lifelong craft that we keep working towards and will probably never master. But just realizing that it is a skill and that it's something that we can get better at over time is a really important step. And ironically, yes, you can also get mentoring about your mentoring. And so there's a meta level to that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so we'll start answering some of the questions that are in the Q&A box. So the first question, I guess, is about the fact that you talked a lot about mentoring and how it's easier to recognize in your supervisor, your mentor, right? But what happens, so that's a sort of obvious choice it doesn't always happen, but it's a sort of obvious choice. So the first question is about what happens when this is not the case, and you pick someone that you would like to have as a mentor, but that person doesn't want to be your mentor. What are you supposed to do? What can you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two different situations there. One is if you want to join a lab and that person just says, no, I'm sorry, I can't be your mentor. Sometimes they might not be able to be a mentor in the way that you want. You know, like if you want to work for someone for your postdoc, but say they don't have funding for a postdoctoral position, and they say, oh, I'm really sorry, I just can't be a mentor to you right now. There is still a place to say, oh, I know you don't have any positions right now, but part of why I was excited to work for you is that I really admire XYZ about you, and I was hoping to learn from you about that. Even if I can't work in your lab, would you be willing to chat with me every once in a while? You know, could I call, have a Zoom call with you once a year, just so that I can still learn from your expertise? That's a way to kind of confront that one. I would say the other situation is if you, and then finding other good people, that there are a lot of people out there who do great science and are wonderful mentors and genuinely caring people. And so, finding another one of those people and just keep looking and just keep applying. If you end up in a situation with someone who you thought was going to be a good mentor, and it turns out that they're not the mentor that you were hoping for, that's a lot more complicated. And that, those situations shouldn't happen. It should be on us to be making sure that everyone is doing that part of their job. But in, an imperfect academic system, often, even though that's, you don't get to have the experience that you deserve to have. And I would say in those cases, it's really a personal decision. And a lot of it depends on your circumstances. I'd say no matter what, find someone who does care about you and has wisdom and experience and can help you navigate that, because sometimes the answer is to switch labs. If you're very early in your PhD, something that's positive is there is far more openness to switching labs than there was, say, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, that when I was in grad school, that was like a very kind of bad thing to do. There was a lot of stigma attached to that, and that has changed dramatically. So it may make sense to switch labs, or it may make sense to finish up, but no matter what, really building up the mentors that you do want to have, still finding people who are in your corner who can both help you talk to your current mentor. Sometimes, again, I said I became a mentor, but I wasn't trained for it. So sometimes it's being able to have a conversation with your advisor and say, hey, I want to be successful. I know you want me to be successful. I want to do as much research as possible. I know you want that too. Can we talk about ways that we can interact that would help me be able to do those things? And if all else fails, then you still have people in your corner who can write letters for you, who can help you out, who can support you, and who can make sure that you make it to that next career step okay.
Thanks. I think we have a couple of other questions that are sort of related to what we are just talking about, so I'll just go with those. So when we think about mentoring that does not involve your supervisors, so PhD or postdoc supervisors, so one of the questions is, how do you actually find them? Someone that is outside the common route. And the other question is about whether should we just expect them to accept this as a common sense and written rule that they should offer such help, or is it just depending on the person you ask to? What would you say about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's lots of different ways to find people, and you can really take advantage of all of those, or you can lean on ones that fit better with your personality. So social media is fantastic, right? We have LinkedIn and Twitter, and well, maybe we don't have Twitter anymore, Mastodon or whatever everyone is going to now. So there's social media routes. There's networking, say at conferences, or if you're at something that's a virtual meeting like this, you can always reach out to people later and say, hey, I attended that virtual event and I know there wasn't a chance to network, but I would love to chat with you still. There's also your network that you have. So often people who work in my lab will come to me and say, I'm thinking about career paths in this area. Do you know anyone who works in that area? And I can say, yes, here are 3 names. I'll connect you by email. So reaching out to the people you know to try and expand into people they know who you can connect with. And, what kind of interaction that is kind of depends on the context, but often it is reaching out and by email or through social media and saying, I really admire whatever, or, you know, I know you have fantastic expertise in this area. Would you be willing to chat with me for 30 minutes in order to share your knowledge and help me as I make my way? Or, you know, would you be willing to share about your experiences? And often people will say yes. You know, sometimes you don't get a response. Sometimes people say, I'm sorry, I can't. Sometimes they say yes. I think that expectations, it's a tough one because while, you know, we all have our own situations, and you might be reaching out to someone when they, you know, are in the middle of a childcare crisis, you know, that their childcare just closed down because of COVID, and all of a sudden they're just really, really struggling, or they're in the middle of a personal emergency, or it's just a really busy time for them. And so I think, you know, not everyone can say yes all of the time. And it's important to realize that if somebody can't say yes, it's usually not personal. It's just that they don't have the capacity, and that they owe it to the people that they are already mentoring to be able to keep doing that and keep making those commitments. But if you reach out to enough people and do it in a specific and guided way of making it personalized, there's a really good chance that some number of those people are going to say yes, especially if you've already built relationships by interacting with them, say on social media, or if you're at a conference. There's a really good chance they'll say yes.
Oh, thanks. So, okay, we have way more questions that we will probably be able to answer right now, but we will try to collect all of them and then ask Jen if she has some time to answer them by email, and then we will share with all of you. So we'll just continue. There are a few questions that are about the relationship you build with the mentor. So let's say after day one, you've met the mentor first time, great vibe, you get a coffee together, you get lunch, everything goes well. What's next? How do you strengthen the relationship so that it goes from being a once, you know, something that happens only once to something that can happen the whole life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the great things about these mentoring relationships is that they don't require, you know, constant attention, that you can talk to someone once and you can come back a few years later and say, we had lunch together a few years ago, and that was really transformative to me. I've run into a situation where I could really use your advice again. Would you be willing to chat, right? It's not something you have to keep going all the time, but certainly following up and continuing to build that relationship is a great idea. I would say, you know, don't reach out to them if there's not actually a way that they can help at that moment necessarily. But if you're in a situation where their advice would be helpful, I think reaching out and asking for advice, or something that is so important, but all of us forget, I know I forget to do, but I so appreciate when it happens, is to just follow up and let them know the impact that their mentoring has already had, or keep them apprised on what's happening in your life, saying, hey, something you said at that lunch was really helpful to me, and because of that, I made this decision, and here's how it worked out. Or just wanted to share, I just moved on to the next stage in my career and really excited about that. And, you know, letting people know the impact that they're having on your life is really just a positive thing. It feels good for people to know they're having impact, but it's also a great way to stay in touch.
Thanks. So I'm going to join other two questions that are more related to slightly negative experiences. So sometimes you have a mentor that is very far away from your field, so you feel like they might not be able potentially to give you the feedback that you would want. Sometimes you get assigned mentors and sometimes they are not good mentors. So what do you do in those situations in which the mentors you are assigned or you have are not giving you the support or the advice that you would need?
Yeah, again, those are tough situations that nobody should have to be in, but if you're in it, it's one that you need to navigate. And I would say you can have times when you have assigned mentors, and you may have to work with those people, but it certainly doesn't exclude you from working with other people as well. And so depending on what those relationships are, you might even be able to go to that person and say, hey, you're really helpful in this field of research. I could also use advice in this field. Would you be able to connect me with someone in that field that I can talk with? Or if you don't have such a positive relationship, you can always still go and find other people who can help you both with what you need help with and who can even help you navigate that situation. Going to, say if you're an early career faculty member and you're assigned a faculty mentoring committee that is going to shepherd you through your early career, if that's not a positive interaction, going to a senior faculty member at another institution and saying, hey, I could, if you've built that relationship, saying, hey, I could use advice, even how do I interact positively with this mentoring committee? I've been assigned this committee of mentors. It's not the smoothest interactions. How can I make this something positive, or how can I navigate through this?
Thanks. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try to wrap up a bit. But you mentioned you mentioned Twitter and social media. So I was just wondering, we have a few questions about being an introvert. How do you actually start socializing when you are an introvert? So I'm just curious, how can you use social network to build your mentoring network?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on your preferences. So social media also gives me a lot of anxiety. And so I'm not on there as much as I used to be. But going on social media, just liking someone's post or commenting, congratulations, or maybe it's messaging them and just asking them a question or asking if they'd be willing to chat. I think that building that relationship by, liking their posts or commenting on their posts is a great way to get started. And then if over time you've built a relationship, then it's a great opportunity to reach out. I'd say in social interactions, this is where this whole asking questions thing is like magic for me. If I know I have a game plan, I feel much better about things. And so, certainly when I hang out with my friends, it's great. We just meet up and we chat. But if I'm going to be in a situation with a bunch of people I don't know, I know that, okay, I can walk in this conversation. If I have 5 questions in the back of my head, or even 3 questions that I know I can ask, then, you can ask a question, listen to the answer, decide whether to ask another question or whether to respond, or maybe someone else jumps in. But if you kind of have those conversation starters ready, the act of asking a question, listening to someone, that again doesn't work for everyone, but that can help overcome some of those hurdles to having conversations. If you kind of have a plan, here's a script for me to have a conversation. At least for me, that really helps. I know it helps for some people, but finding whatever works for you that can help you to feel more comfortable in those situations.
Thanks. So I'm going to ask you one sort of last question and then maybe a word of advice for everyone. We have a few questions that are about whether it's better to have people giving you advice from completely different perspectives, or people that are maybe in similar situations to the one that you are asking advice for, or whether it's better to have one or a lot of different advice. You also mentioned that you asked advice from a lot of different people, and maybe a smaller number would have been more useful. So what's your feeling about the number of advice that you should, of mentors that you should actually have, and whether it's better to go for someone completely out of your field or completely in a different position or not?
Oh, such a good question. I would say that the number of people, that's a little bit of a personal preference. Someone who is a mentor to me once said, I ask 3 or 4 people because it gives me lots of perspectives. But if I ask more than that, I start to confuse myself about what I should do. So it depends on your preferences and how many different opinions you want and how you deal with that the best. I would say, as far as whether people should be in your field or out of your field, I think that almost always the more different perspectives, the broader the set of perspectives, the better. But it also depends on the situation. Like for me, wondering if I'm going to get tenure and having to navigate this very specific sort of academic situation, going to someone who wasn't in academia, they probably wouldn't have had the most helpful of advice. But then on the flip side, there was a defining moment for me with someone who's a friend, but became a mentor as well, where I was talking about something I was doing with my group with professional development and how we were thinking about how we organize as a group. And he looked at me and said, Jen, that's just organizational leadership. And I was like, the light bulb went on. I was like, oh my goodness. And it was the moment I realized, as he continued to talk, there's this whole field out there in the business world where people talk about things like communication and feedback and networking and all of these different things that I had not known the words for yet to even go and find that knowledge. And that only happened because I talked with someone who is far, far, far removed from academia, far removed from science. And so I think in general, cultivating a network of mentors that as you move through your career just gets broader and broader and broader is so beneficial. And some of these people are just your friends. They're your friends or your relatives who work in different fields from you, right? But they can share information that you don't have, and then that's mentoring. So I think, you know, having that broad network is usually really good. But then, yeah, there are certain situations where you're going to want to go to people who have a very specific set of expertise.
Thanks. So I guess we can maybe ask Beatrice if she has one last question, and then we can wrap up.
Last question to conclude this webinar. So as Jen, you can be the mentors of all of us today. Which is the final tips that you can send to us to find mentors and live this academia in the right way, maybe?
One piece of advice. I think it would be to just keep building that network. To, you know, there might be some mentoring relationships that don't work out, or there might be some people who say, I'm sorry, I just don't have the capacity to meet with you right now on a regular basis. But the more you build up that network and the more people you're connected with who you can go to for advice, and the broader the set of perspectives and knowledge and connections that those people have, that's just an unbelievably powerful thing for your career. And then show that you're going to be the type of person who will do that for others as well. Thank you.
This was a very powerful message, I think, for both mentees and mentors. And I guess this hour taught us that we can be mentors and mentees at the same time. We never stop being mentees, and we start being mentors way before we think we realize that. So yeah, with this, I would like to thank Jen for being with us and for sharing with us this amazing advice and tips about how to find a mentor, how to approach difficult situations. So yeah, really, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I would like to thank Beatrice for being an amazing co-chair in this webinar, and obviously the European Young Chemists Network that gave us the opportunity to do this webinar for all of us. And as I said at the earlier, we've copied all the questions, and we will try to get an answer for everyone as soon as we can. So with this, thank you very much to everyone again, and have a nice rest of the day for everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.